Tell me when I'm live.
You're on.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the third edition of Social Distancing, our tribute to Black History Month. I'm Editor-in-Chief Paul Heller of Blue Heron Bookworks, and today you lucky folks are going to be listening to Bathsheba Monk reading from her short story collection, Now You See It, Tales from Cokesville. I'll be reading my favorite story from the collection, Mrs. Szewczak and Rescue Dog. Mrs. Szewczak and Rescue Dog is about the past, but it's very much a reflection of today. And during the reading, Nate the Mime, is going to be miming the action from the story. Now, I wanted you to know that both Nate the Mime book, The Mime Speaks, and he's the author. And Now You See It, the short story collection by Bathsheba Monk. They're both available on Amazon. Enjoy yourself, people. You're going to have a good time.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the reading. Welcome, Nate, the mime. He's going to be helping me tell the story of Mrs. Szewczak and the rescue dog. I'll start. Mrs. Szewczak knew her toes would fall off if Rescue Dog didn't find her soon. She stomped around the deserted bus stop trying to get feeling back into her feet. Her boots were brand new, but already only 2 hours in the snow, they were soaked through. She started to compose an angry letter to the shoe company in her head, but felt too woozy to continue. The soft white snowbanks looked inviting, and she tried not to stare at them. She'd heard that sitting down was the worst thing you could do if you were stranded in a snowstorm. So she kept walking from one end of the little hut to the other. "Keep moving or die," she said out loud, just like a shark. This struck her as funny, and she began to laugh. She laughed for a long time, then realized she sounded crazy and stopped. Everything was quiet and the snow piled up. A Jeep wouldn't be able to get through soon. Where was Rescue Dog? She would just have to sit tight until Rescue Dog made the rounds of the bus stops looking for stranded people. Her husband, John, hadn't approved of her working. He had made a big thing of what she did or how much money she made. He never even asked her where her office was. After she started, they had a big fight about it. "Why is right here in this house?" "That's right," she'd said, "in this house. Cooped up all day in this house, cleaning and cooking, and for what? Job, that's for what. I go out and make money, and you take care of the house and me, and..." He hung his head, groping for the reason. "And what, John? You're not here anymore. You might as well have died with him. Paul isn't here anymore. Paul isn't here anymore. Don't say that." John had slammed the table with his fist. "You have to say it. Don't say it. Say it, say it, say it." Mrs. Szewczak shook herself. She was talking to the bus stop sign, not John. She brushed off the white powder that had accumulated on her coat and hat and went back under the shelter. She and John didn't talk about anything after that. Orders, pass the peas, pass the bread. Then last year, John died too. Out of habit, she never talked about that either. She kept the obituary yellow and brittle in her wallet. Now and then she read it to herself. Now she heard a motor in the distance and peered out. She couldn't see clearly. It was probably a Jeep. Nothing else would be able to get through roads like this. Whatever it was, it needed a muffler. A huge green Pontiac snaked into view. She stood in the middle of the road and waved frantically. The Pontiac lumbered up to the incline to the bus stop and swayed to a stop right in front of her. The driver rolled down his window, and Mrs. Szewczak saw, her joy giving way to apprehension, that it was a black man. He wore an army fatigue jacket with a name tag still attached over his left breast pocket, Sharon. He had a neatly trimmed beard, giving him a distinguished look. Another man, skinny with long bony fingers wrapped around a homemade cigarette, slouched in the passenger seat. His features shadowed by an oversized green and black knit hat, curled out of the car. She paused for a moment, seduced by the unfamiliar aroma, before addressing the men. "Are you Rescue Dog?" she asked tentatively. "What? Sharon asked. He squinted at her through the snowflakes, which hit him on the cheeks and the nose, immediately melting. Nah, we're going to the store. I'm waiting for rescue dogs, she said, to take me home. I didn't see anybody on the road. Sharon took a small cigarette from the other man. He inhaled deeply and held his breath. His eyes got huge and white from the effort. If you're not rescue dog, what are you doing out? She asked. Sharon exhaled suddenly, and the unusual smell rushed out to her. My old lady needs Pampers for the baby. She stepped back instinctively. She had never seen it, smelled it, but she knew they were smoking marijuana. Look, lady, I don't think anybody's coming to get you. We'll take you home as soon as we get the Pampers. Maybe you could just take me to a phone booth so I can call my husband. She didn't want these men to think nobody cared where she was. She realized then no one would miss her. If she didn't show up, no one would miss her for days. I think there's a phone booth at the Kmart. That's where we're going, Sharon said. We'll take you there. The Kmart was at least 5 miles away. I think there's a 7-Eleven that's a little closer, she said. Nah, they're too expensive. She kicked her heels against the ground and couldn't feel them. That was a bad sign. The next stage was turning blue. These men might rob her, she thought. Her boss always paid her in cash. She had $60 on her now. People murdered for less. In New York, some men had robbed and murdered a man who had only $10 on him. Then they dumped him in a garbage can. The skinny man in the passenger seat roused himself. Hey, Mama, you coming or not? Mrs. Szewczak opened the back door. She moved some baby toys and a rumpled blanket, sat behind the driver to see his face in the rearview mirror. Inside the car wasn't much warmer than out, and Mrs. Szewczak shivered, thinking about her feet. The Pontiac fishtailed down the other side of the incline and moved on. It was getting dark and hard to see anything past the road, only woods. She wanted to remove her boots to check on her feet, but didn't want to be caught off guard if one of them tried something. You really have good traction, she said. You must have some great snow tires. Yeah, Sharon looked at her in the rearview mirror. We also got a trunk load of bricks. His expression never changed, and he didn't volunteer any more information about the bricks. Relaxed into the idea. It would be as easy as lying down in the snowbank. No one would blame her. These men were on drugs, and although they seemed relatively peaceful, she'd read a lot about the side effect of drugs. Normal men did strange, unpredictable things while high, going on rampages for a fix. But she'd seen the plump bag the skinny man delicately tapped to fill rolling paper. They seemed to have plenty to keep them happy. Of course, do people who do drugs ever have enough? She didn't know. If she was going to die tonight, it was more than likely she was going to freeze to death. It's freezing in here, she said. Yeah, Sharon said, the heater don't work. 7-Eleven was on the left. The huge sign lit up the only car in the parking lot. It looked like the lights in the store were still on. She wanted to tell them to stop, and she'd pay for the Pampers, but that would bring attention to her purse. She clutched her bag closer, and they drove on. Mrs. Szewczak had no idea where they were, and she felt fuzzy from the smoke. She was sure they should have reached the Kmart by now. Maybe they were lost. Maybe the marijuana made them lose their sense of direction. Suddenly, Sharon turned off the road and came to an abrupt stop. Mrs. Szewczak strained to see where they were. It was a deserted parking lot. Shit, Sharon said, getting out of the car. It's closed. The other man followed him, his two long jeans dragging through the snow, picking up white powder that would later turn to ice against his wiry legs. Mrs. Szewczak got out and tested her feet. They were still numb. Maybe she was going to die from the ground up, slowly freezing until she was a block of ice. The three of them went up to the dark store and peered inside. Not even the emergency lights were lit. Is the phone out here somewhere, she asked. She would call a rescue dog. They would come and get her, and that would be that. She would be safe. Sharon pointed into the darkened foyer. The phone was right next to the cigarette machines. He pulled on the door, but they were locked. Mrs. Szewczak looked mournfully at the locked door and thought about the trunk full of bricks. I have to call, she said. I know. Sharon pulled his beard thoughtfully. Couldn't we do something? Nothing we can do. It's locked up. I guess, she said, disappointed. The 7-Eleven was open. Well, we'll go there. In the 10 minutes that we're on the road, it had become completely dark. And even with their load of bricks, it took almost 45 minutes to drive slowly back to the 7-Eleven. Finally, the sign, and they inched into the parking lot, their tires spinning. The lights were off, and the car that had been there was gone. Shit, Sharon said. What are we going to do? I don't think we can go any further. Sharon leaned back in his seat. The roads are too bad. Mrs. Szewczak got out of the car to examine the deserted store and ran back excitedly. There's a phone in there. The passenger was rolling another cigarette. That doesn't do us any good, Mama. I saw some Pampers in there too. What are you trying to say, Mama? He meticulously finished the ends of the cigarette and put it in his mouth. He looked back at Mrs. Szewczak with red rodent eyes. He put a match to his cigarette, sucking in his already spare cheeks. We have a trunkload of bricks, she said, impatient that they didn't make the connection themselves. We could break a window and get inside. The two men laughed loudly, the passenger coughing. He opened a window, gulping air. Finally, the coughing fit subsided. You crazy, Mama, he said at last. That's looting, and they shoot looters. No one's going to come out here in this weather just to shoot someone for trying to make a phone call. Right. They started laughing again. Excuse me. I have to get home. We'll take you home. We said we would. Cool your jets. We can't go any further. You said so yourself. Then we'll just have to wait until someone finds us. When will that be? No one's out here. No one's going to come out here till the storm's over. I should have waited in the bus stop for rescue dog. Sharon took the joint from his hand and contemplated the situation. I didn't see any other cars out here, did you? How come you're out in this shit anyway? Doesn't your husband know where you are or know to come and look for you? He'll be here, she said quietly. For the first time, she prayed there wasn't an afterlife. She wanted no possibility that John would look down from a celestial perch with his closed and angry face and say, I told you not to work. Look where it's gotten you. You should be safe at home. I told you not to leave the house. You should be home where I can protect you. She still couldn't feel her feet and bent over to pull off her boots. I think I have frostbite. What? Sharon turned on the light and faced her. Put your feet up here. She pulled off her socks. They were very red. She started to massage them vigorously. Wait, don't do that, Sharon yelled at her. That's the worst thing you could do. How do you know? I was a medic in Nam. Yeah, he was, the other man nodded and dragged on the cigarette. That couldn't have taught you much about frostbite. I know more than you. Sharon poked at her feet. You feel that? No. He jumped out of the car and got in the back seat with her. Where's that damn blanket? Mrs. Szewczak pulled it out from under her. Your socks are soaked. Here. He lowered her feet from the front seat and wrapped them in the blanket, then set them on his lap. Mrs. Szewczak felt awkward. Besides her doctor, John had been the only person in her adult life to touch her. For the second time that evening, Mrs. Szewczak prayed for the dissolution of heaven so John couldn't spy on her. He would have another coronary if he saw her in the back seat of this beat-up car, her feet ensconced in the lap of this large stranger. It felt comfortable too, she admitted, ashamed of the thought, and warm. My son was in the Marines, in Vietnam, she said. Yeah, he said, interested. What unit? I don't know. I mean, I have it written down, but I can never remember it. Those military addresses are so confusing. I wrote to him almost 3 times a week. She sighed heavily and closed her eyes. When did he come back? He came home on leave once instead of going to Japan. You know, he wanted to see us. Excuse me. Then he went back there and stepped on a mine. Mrs. Szewczak said that matter-of-factly, as if it weren't the first time she ever said it aloud. When she closed her eyes, she could see Paul, whole 1 minute, exploding the next. They'd collected only bits of him that they found in bushes, scraped off other shoulders. They couldn't find anything, though. Bits of him were still there, stuck on things. That was a thought that choked her awake at night. The vow of silence John had imposed on her kept the room still, but her soul screamed the horror. Every night her dreams were a fresh assault. I guess you've seen a lot like that over there. Oh. He wanted to go, could hardly wait till he was 18, she said. We didn't want him to. He's our only child. Was our only child. But he had to do it. Yeah. Sharon absently stroked her feet and gazed out the window. The passenger passed a joint to the back seat toward Mrs. Szewczak. She shook her head, but Sharon took it. I guess everybody did drugs over there. She said, that's what I've read. Yeah, just about. Maybe Paul was on drugs when he stepped on the mine. She didn't know why she was saying these things to Sharon. She never even said them to John. But it was something that Mrs. Szewczak had thought about for years. Maybe dope had made him careless. Sharon gave the joint back to the other man without dragging on it and looked for a while at Mrs. Szewczak. Nah, he wasn't there long enough to get into that. Maybe it would have hurt less if he was on dope. Sharon looked at her intently. Don't worry, lady. He probably never knew what hit him. That somehow made her feel better. Maybe Paul never knew what hit him. The thought of him in that kind of pain a blast like that would cause was almost too much to bear. Every molecule tearing him apart. It was good to think he never felt it, that he just sort of evaporated. I have to tell John, she said, my husband. She wondered if John could see what was happening. Hear what Sharon had said. Would that comfort him? Not that she blamed him for anything, but she knew that if you clasp living things too tightly, you might keep them close, but you suffocate them. They would run away at the first chance to get some air. She knew that Paul had joined the Marines to escape his father. That's why she and John stopped talking, because if they talked about anything at all, the reason Paul joined the Marines would come up, and some things were just too terrible to say out loud. She thought again about the situation at hand. What are you going to do with those bricks in your trunk, she asked. I just got a job finishing a garage for this guy. Are you a carpenter? I used to work in the mill before it closed. I'm doing odd jobs now. I want my kid to have things. How old is he? 4 months. Little Desmond is 4 months. He pulled out his wallet and showed her a snapshot of a woman holding a bundle. Is that your wife? That's Cynthia. You can't see much of Desmond. He's only a couple of days old there. Your mother must be so proud being a grandmother. Yeah, well, she already had 25 grandchildren. She died a couple of years ago. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, she would have liked old Desmond. He's a special kid. He looked at the snapshot again before putting it back in his wallet. I let my older kid get away, but I'm not letting Desmond get away. He clenched his fists in a gesture that was familiar to Mrs. Szewczak, because John always did it. She didn't know what shape Sharon's grip would make on Desmond's heart, but it scared her. She wanted to take Sharon's hands in hers, pry open his hold on Desmond, but of course she couldn't. She had no rights with this man, this stranger. Geez, it's getting colder in here. Sharon looked at his watch, then peered in the blanket at her feet. I think we better do something. Those don't look so good. Sharon got out of the back seat, took the key from the ignition. His skinny friend was out of the car in a second. Mrs. Szewczak could hear them arguing, but couldn't make out the words. Finally, Sharon unlocked the trunk, put out an armful of bricks, and walked up to the entrance. He took aim. The first brick broke the glass in the door and set off a blood-chilling alarm. He threw the remaining bricks ferociously at the glass that still hung from the frame. He ran back to the car. Quick, what's your phone number? She told him, knowing that no one would be there to take the call. He ran back to the store. His friend joined him. They were a long time on the phone, and she couldn't see them dialing and redialing her number, trying to get John to pick it up. They were coming back when a snowplow whirred up the road. A police four-wheel drive vehicle was right behind it. Its red lights were flashing. They had chains on their tires, but it was still astounding how quickly they made it to the store. It was miles to the police station. The snowplow cleared a path into the parking lot, then turned around and went back up the road. 2 policemen jumped out of the vehicle. They had their guns pulled and yelled for the 2 men to lean against the car to be frisked. One cop pulled a little plastic bag out of the passenger's pocket. He said something, jerking his head toward the Pontiac. The cop shoved the man's shoulder, pushing him down. Presently, one of the officers shined a flashlight in the car and opened the back door. You have some identification, ma'am? Yes. She fumbled in her wallet, scattering some cards on the floor. As she handed him the license, a piece of John's obituary broke off and landed at the policeman's feet in the snow, disintegrating. She stared at the pulp, horrified. Ma'am? Mrs. Szewczak shook herself awake to the present. I asked them to do it, you know. She said, it was my fault. I made them do it. The policeman guided the beam of his flashlight to her driver's license. Get out of the car, please. I have to get my boots on, she said. I think I have frostbite. That man, Mr. Sharon, was helping me. Please, it's all my fault. Everything. I'm to blame. The policeman looked first at her feet, then at her face. Just stay where you are. We'll get you an ambulance. The policeman wrote something on a little pad and went back to the squad car. The two men were still leaning against the car, snow piling up on them, but the cops seemed oblivious to the disappearing figures. Mrs. Szewczak watched them, as if her vigilance would keep them intact, but the darkness and the snow played tricks on her, and she found their lines breaking up. An ambulance finally pulled up to the Pontiac. The attendants got her out of the back seat and slipped her onto the stretcher. The sign on the side of the ambulance said, "Rescue Dog." The attendant strapped her arms down so she couldn't wave goodbye. But she bobbed her head around to see her rescuers, the two men leaning against the police car. I have to tell Mr. Sharon about Desmond, she said desperately to the medic. I have to tell him something very important. We have to get you to the hospital, the medic said. You can tell him later. They turned around and pushed her toward the ambulance. She called to them, my John is dead too. Sharon looked up, but she couldn't tell if he heard her. John is dead, she said, crying into the blizzard. Her words fought to get through the snowflakes, but instead became entangled with them, blowing with them as they twirled up and over the dismal landscape where they landed on places unseen and unknown. I couldn't tell you before. I didn't mean to lie. She yelled it as loud as she could, but they were already in the back of the squad car and didn't hear her. Thank you.
Wow, what a story, huh, folks? Thank you, Nate. You were wonderful. And remember, everybody, Nate the Mime and Stories from Cokesville, BA, Now You See It, are both available on Amazon. This is Social Distancing signing off. We'll see you again soon.